Okay, well, happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. You know, somebody with the name Eileen hosting a meeting is definitely going to recognize today, one of my mother's favorite holidays. So glad you could all join us. Boy, I see in the chat, Terry, you still hear nothing. Terry, you might try dropping and reconnecting. Because it seems like it might be, okay, someone else did the same thing. Yeah, because it seems like it might be on your end if everyone else can hear us. So, okay. Okay, well, like I said, thank you for joining us. We have our usual lineup of topics today. Let's see if I can get over here. We will cover just a general update. I will cover a general update on the NG911 project. And then I will actually also cover a toolbox update. Will Trimble has, as you know, has taken over for Kristen Jordan Koenig in that role in taking care of all the toolbox maintenance, development, data processing, post-processing, communications, all sorts of good things there. And he is out sick today. So I'm going to do my best to cover his slides. So we'll see how that goes. But Sherry can chime in if needed. And then Sherry will cover the GeoMSAG and training update. All right, so just some general program update items. The first thing is for the hosted solution call handling mapping software, we again use Rapid Deploy's Radius Plus. That is what is deployed across the state if your PSAP is on the hosted solution. We recently had an upgrade to version 4 for that particular software. And that was in February. It went great, no issues with the upgrade. You know, users all very happy with the upgrade. There's really no impact to all the imagery web services that we provide and process out that are used in Radius Plus or on the data processing side for us. I'd say the major impact was probably more on your telecommunicators. It was a major redesign of the user interface, I think for the better. So I know as you've all peeked in your PSAP, there's a lot of things in front of your telecommunicators, and this just kind of made the layout a little more logical and also allowed room for better interface with, like, you know, text to 911 and call logs and different things like that. So the map is still a major part of the interface, but I think the redesign really helped kind of the layout, hopefully make the telecommunicators' job a little easier. So that's kind of what's happened with the call handling mapping software. For data submissions, we owe you again another thank you for your 100% participation. I just want to point out, you know, we've had 100% participation since we started this back in 2015, which kind of blows my mind because I still can't believe it's 2022, but here we are. So thank you for your continued participation, submission, and being mindful of getting those updates submitted. So we, of course, are in Q1 of 2022. So the next submission deadline is at the end of this month, March 31st. So as usual, I will watch the queue and probably early next week, if I notice that your PSAP has not submitted data for this quarter, I'll start sending out my little pesky reminders to make sure and get data submitted. So fair warning, if you don't want my little reminder, go ahead and get your data submitted so you won't get that email, that nagging email from Eileen. The next thing is the 2018 NG911 imagery. Great news, it's gone public. As you know, that was a licensed imagery product. Part of the contract with Surdex and Hexagon was that it had a licensing agreement. And part of our agreement with them was that once the 2021 was flown and made available, and Hexagon had a replacement for that Kansas imagery in place for their needs, that the 2018 imagery could become public. So the good news about that is we'll be putting out a public image service for the 2018 imagery on the DASC website, as well as the option to download those Mr. SID files as well. So kind of watch the DASC website for an update on that. I know most of you probably already have this data, that imagery, but I know it's kind of nice to be able to connect to an image service if you want to see the statewide imagery for any purpose. It's already used in different things like in the ORCA applications for the appraisers and different things like that. So it's nice we're not going to have it be authenticated and protected for the licensing agreement. So it's public, so more to come on that on the desk website. Speaking of imagery, we have some new imagery coming very soon. So as you all know, we acquired imagery about this time or earlier last year for 2021 with Surdex again. So the acquisition is complete, the pilot area review. We've actually, I should have added, we've done the statewide QA. So we're now at the point where we're doing a review of the QA corrections that all of our users flagged, all of our inspectors. And again, we had, I think, 50 some inspectors across the state help inspect the data. So thank you again if you helped with those efforts. You guys did a great job of marking, you know, bridge misalignment or smoky areas or anything you thought should be reviewed. So we really appreciate all your help with that. So we're kind of in the middle of doing that kind of second round of QA, which is much smaller. It's just reviewing, you know, the few tiles that were marked and whether they were correctable or what the next action items were on that. And with that, some reflights came up. So I've got a slide of that next, so I'll kind of hold that for a moment. But we did, through conversations with Surdex, agreed that there were a few areas that rose to the level of deserving to be reflown. So I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide to show you those areas. As a reminder, we are in really a 3-year contract with Surdex for this imagery acquisition. So the local buy-up option is still available. And I've included Jack King's information there. Feel free to reach out to him with more information on that. So again, those local buy-up contracts are between you and Surdex. It just gives you the opportunity to obtain the imagery kind of through the state contract, but with your own contract without having to RFP and everything like that. So feel free to reach out to Jack if you're interested in that. And I know several counties, some have done countywide 6-inch resolution. A lot of counties have done 6-inch or 3-inch resolution acquisitions over just their incorporated areas or cities. So they're willing to work with you on whatever your area of interest is and provide you a quote for that. So when are we going to get this data? So like I said, we're in the second round of QA. We anticipate the data to be delivered sometime next quarter. It will be delivered in GeoTIFF and Mr. SID formats. Of course, the GeoTIFF will be the really small tiles, which are, I believe, quarter tiles of the 24K USGS quadrangle. So those will be the smaller ones that really won't be out for, those are never put out for download or distribution just because there's a ton and they're huge. But we use those for things like creating the image service. But what will be available for download through a grid, just like the 2014 and soon to be 2018 imagery, will be the Mr. SID 24K USGS quadrangle tiles. Those will be, like I said, in Mr. SID format, and those will be in the state plane projection. We're also receiving the data in the low distortion projection, the Kansas Regional Coordinate System. And then eventually in state plane 2022, which I don't think is going to actually happen in 2022, but they're not going to rename it. So state plane 2022, which is kind of what happened with previous versions, I guess. Once the reference frames are released and that is available, we will also get it in that projection as well. So what will happen is once we receive the data, as quickly as we can, we'll create and publish the image service. We'll put together the grid and interface for Mr. SID downloads, and then also put together the dedicated tile cache for the rapid deploy Radius Plus map, the imagery that's pulled into the call handling software. We will also work on some sort of a request tool. For example, if you want to acquire your county or a larger area and downloading it would be too burdensome, we'll figure out some sort of a request queue process where you can submit a request for that. And the conditions of that, of course, are you provide the flash drive or the external hard drive for that, but we'd be happy to copy that if it's a larger area onto that external hard drive for you. So lots more coming on that. We're very excited to get that new imagery. Okay, so I mentioned reflights. The areas in orange, these actual areas were reflown by Surdex this week, yesterday and the day before, because we finally got a break from snow. I think spring is finally here. So for the most part, these areas were identified as either some slightly out of focus issues, some areas of smoke that really couldn't be corrected just by color balancing, or anything in particular that they thought maybe it's best just to refly these areas. So what will happen is, of course, this won't be delivered at the same time as the 2021 acquisition, but once this is QA process and everything, we'll eventually integrate that into the 2021 imagery service. So once this imagery is available, it'll be seamless to you all. It'll be in the service, available for download, all that good stuff. So I guess the major impact is if one of your counties is being reflown, we'll have to just make sure and keep continuing to communicate with you that, partial part of your county has been reflown and when that data is available, so you can update the imagery you have for your area. But we really appreciate Surdex working with us on that. This is where the across the state inspectors did a fantastic job of identifying areas that warranted a second look, not only the areas that were reflown, but all over the state. And we really couldn't have done this without you all. So we appreciate your due diligence and Surdex's efforts in making sure that we get the best quality imagery for the state of Kansas. So more to come on that. Here, when we just thought we were about done QAing, we'll get to do some more QA, but in a good way, because we love getting more imagery and quality data. So it's a good thing. Okay. So now I'm going to switch my gears here. If you have questions throughout the webinar, feel free to pop them down into the chat. I'll try to kind of monitor that as well. But now I'm going to switch hats and for Will Trimble, a report on NG911 toolbox updates. So the last release, which was 2.2.95, there were no major changes, just some minor corrections. The main thing was for hydrants. There was a little bit of confusion. I think in the portal, we were looking for the private field, we were looking for a YNU value, but the toolbox was checking for those spelled out. So this has been great that Will's come on board and said, hey, he's noticed, we jokingly call him kind of our data detective, because he's been noticing little nuances that, we think we have everything buttoned down and just right, but he's been noticing some little things odd here and there that just aren't consistent with, like this example, where the data model said one thing, but the toolbox was checking something else. So we got that all in alignment with this latest toolbox release. And then also there was a Python script in the attributes tool that had a bad path. So that was corrected as well with this last release. So nothing major there, just kind of some minor updates. This is our friendly reminder, which kind of goes along with what we've just discovered with that, is now that we've matured so much in this project, it's great that we're really in maintenance mode, and hopefully everyone is using their next gen 911 data for multiple purposes. But just a reminder, things like, please submit your data in uppercase, unless otherwise noted in the data model for that field. And that's a requirement, and also kind of helps when we're trying to do any sort of comparison or things like that. I think we have some checks in there that will make sure if it's a mixed case, it gets converted to uppercase, and then it compares those values to make sure they match if it's doing some sort of comparison. But just in general, make sure that uppercase is used for your attributes. So with that in mind, Will had this question that I think we could kind of gauge interest through the chat. Will would be willing to host a workshop on using Attribute Assistant or attribute rules, depending on which desktop software you're using, to learn how to auto-populate those fields for your NG911 data. again, I think we're so much in the maintenance mode that we're all busy doing everything that sometimes certain things get introduced that you don't mean to. So if you could reply in the chat and let me know if you'd be interested in attending some sort of it'd probably be just a webinar type of a thing that he'd be willing to host for y'all, just to see if that would help in your daily maintenance of your NG911 data. So yeah, just put in the chat if interested. Okay, so some upcoming toolbox changes. We've noticed that the value null and blank was not being caught in some of our routines. So there's a loophole in the logic checks that allowed null or blank to be accepted in the address points submit field. So you have to have submit yes or no. We were seeing that there were some blank or null values that are still passing through. So we need to make sure that submit is such a big field for address points. A lot of things, which I'll talk about, rely on that. We need to make sure there's a value in there. So on the upcoming toolbox change, we will start looking for that with results for those put in the template check results and field value check results tables, as Will has snapshots here. So to let you know if you have any null or blank values for the submit field. And this doesn't affect many people at all. There were only 43 records out of about 105 million that we found these null or blank values. So I think, again, one of those update processes that just got accidentally overlooked, but it's important we have this value. So we're going to add this additional check for it. And I think on the next webinar, we'll talk to this in more detail as well, but a good way just to make sure the data, all the important values are included. Okay, so another thing coming up is the discussion about controlling the level of submission for address points. This has been interesting when you really think about everything the 911 data is used for, even just within 911. It's kind of amazing. So with your address points being marked as submit equals yes or no, that's a trigger for us to do certain things with the data to kind of process it downstream for items. So if it's a submit no, we're just going to ignore that because we know that that's a local use. But submit yes, we have to kind of pay attention to what's happening to it from that point on, because some of those, obviously those go into things like geocoders, goes into the rapid deploy RAISE Plus software and into EGDMS. But of course, sometimes it's primary versus secondary. So you can see there's a lot of things downstream that the submit yes and no affect. So kind of to better discuss that, one of the reasons we noticed this was we were noticing that, well, I guess let's back up a little. First, for this one, I think Sherry's going to touch on this a little bit in her portion about some updates to the data model version 3, which should be coming out, I think maybe sometime this summer or later this year, which will talk about these local unique scenarios and where submit should be yes, no, and how that can impact the other fields associated with address points. So in following that whole pattern of address points again, we're going to add some additional quality control checks for address points where the GeoMSAG is marked yes and no. We've discovered some areas where there is a valid road center line where an address point is also being marked as a GeoMSAG yes. So for example, there's a house, at 111 Main being marked as yes, it's a GeoMSAG address point, but there's also a road segment of 100, to 199 Main that's going into the GeoMSAG. So this kind of creates some overlapping areas and duplication when the address point and the road center line are both marked. And that can cause some confusion in submitting to EGDMS. Especially if they were to take the address point or pline, that was what we converted to, over the road range. It could actually greatly affect your GeoMSAG if they decided that 111 Main is the GeoMSAG to honor, and let's say, for example, the road center line is marked as no, then it would reduce your GeoMSAG for that whole range to 111 Main. So just some different nuances like that we're discovering that we just need to be a little more vigilant about. So that will also be being added to the upcoming toolbox changes. It'll be checked at submission and on demand with a toolbox enhancement tool, really through the enhancement tool of GeoCompare address points, to have an option to calculate this out to see where these conflicts might occur. So it's all about making sure your data gets in there the right way, and we want to make sure we're not eliminating any data or ranges that really should truly be there, because for some reason the address point is marked something as a duplicate of this street center line. So I probably didn't describe that quite as eloquently as Will would have, because he kind of digs into the weeds a little more than I do on this type of information. But good news is he'll be on the next webinar and he can walk you through this whole thing again, explaining exactly all of our checks. In the meantime, let's see, I think that's for me. In the meantime, always feel free to reach out to myself or William or Will. His email address is williamtrimble@ku.edu, and I can put that in the chat. So if you're like, oh my God, that was so confusing what Eileen was talking about the webinar, that's okay. You can email Will and get a clarification. But again, this won't be coming until the next toolbox update, which won't be until well after the this quarterly deadline. So this, we're talking sometime like April or May. So we'll have additional information that'll come out along with it. So we won't just surprise you with this. Okay.
And just to kind of add on to that a little bit, it's also our intention to give you guys some real world examples along the way as this comes out of exactly what, how you would want to handle a certain address point or certain MSAG situations that both from the submit field, like Eileen was talking about earlier, to the GeoMSAG field, and just kind of give you an example of how some of that goes and what data sets things end up in depending on how you flag them, because it can be kind of confusing. And as we're putting these tools together to script tests and things to alert you that it's there, we also want you to understand sort of the philosophy behind it, so that you're not just getting something that comes up in the toolbox and says, hey, you did this wrong, but you have some idea of knowing what the address is for and what you want done with it, how you should resolve that error, because it's going to be different depending on the use of the address. So we're hoping to give you not just a new toolbox, but a document that includes examples of how best to deal with specific types of address issues.
I think that's a really good point, because when they started going through, Sherry, Will, and I've met a few times to discuss this, and there's a few times I'm like, if submits yes and GeoMSAG yes, then what? You know, it's kind of following that whole path and understanding why it would be set certain ways. So yeah, I think the additional documentation will be really helpful for that. Okay, well, with that, I will advance to the next slide, if I think I can here, and hand it off to Sherry.
All right. You can go ahead. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is the data model. We are actually, at the end of this phone call, going to release version 2.3 of the data model. There's nothing earth-shattering in it. That hydrant issue that Eileen mentioned, which was an issue between the validation tools and the portal, is also an issue between the official domain spreadsheet and the data model, and so that needed to be corrected so that everything was all lined up appropriately. And then while we were making that edit, we also went through and did some clerical corrections to increase the clarity of some of the sections and deal with punctuation issues and misspellings and things like that. So there is no substantive change in version 2.3, but that will become the official version. We just wanted to talk about it in user group before it goes out. It has not had a public review or anything, and it won't, because it is not changing any of the requirements. It's just sort of cleaning up issues that we didn't realize we had. It's also kind of in preparation for version 3. So the national NG911 GIS data model is about ready to publish version 2. The work group is dealing with the last of the public comments, and as soon as those are handled, and presuming that none of them end up changing the document substantially, then that document will get published. Once the new national data model gets published, we will have to align with it. And one of the things that we want to do is to provide some specific documentation about how we align with it. And what I mean by that is that, for example, for a long time, the national data model has had fully spelled out directionals and street types and things like that as the standard. And of course, because that's not how people, particularly not people in Kansas, tend to use their data locally, we kept it at the abbreviations. So that sounds like we're out of alignment with the national data model. We are not, because in post-processing, when we receive your data, we calculate those fields out to make sure whenever the data leaves our hands for an NG911 related purpose, it has those fully spelled out fields in it. So we know that, and you guys probably already knew that because I've talked about it quite a few times before, but we wanted to put documentation within the data model to say, okay, here's the national, and here's how we get there, whether it's something we require of you or something that we do in post-processing, just so that if you have any questions or you have a vendor you're dealing with or you run into any issues with the data, you have a nice, clear way to understand how we're meeting that national guidance. Similarly, we want to add a little bit more documentation, and this on dealing with addressing scenarios. This is not about address assignment, but more about how you want to view addresses. Over the past several months, we've had questions about dealing with addresses along bike trails or park trails, or how to deal with mile markers on local roads or markers, distance markers of some kind along rivers. We've had questions about dealing with addresses on pivot irrigators that have phone lines, addresses on wind turbines, and things like that. And while assigning those addresses can be complicated and is sort of beyond the scope of our data model, once you have the address assigned, it can also be complicated to figure out, how do I put that in the NG911 data? Where does it need to go? What purpose does it serve? What places do I want it to show up, and what places do I not want it to show up? And so our design, or our desire, is at version 3 to include an entire section, probably an appendix, that is entirely based on, you have an address, you want to see it in this place, you don't want to see it in this place, here's how you flag it, here's how you store it. And to include that as a sort of a permanent part of the data model. It'll be real similar to the information that we put out with the toolbox update, because it'll be those examples, probably plus some additionals that come up in the interim, but trying to put some clarity on exactly how you get data in specific spots, like the address locators and geocoders that are used for various purposes, on the map in 911, in the MSAG, places like that. So we're going to pack all of that into version 3, which is going to be timed, obviously, with the publishing of the national data model. Right now, the estimate is that data model will be finished by the end of spring, but there's no guarantee on that date. So as soon as it is finished, we will start working on version 3. Again, we don't intend to make any changes that we don't absolutely have to, and those changes will, for right now anyway, all be associated with alignment with the new data model. So next slide, please. One of the big things, of course, that happens with the data is that it goes into the MSAG. And I've talked to you guys before about the fact that we are converting to the Public Safety Platform, or PSP, which is a new home for the MSAG. The old home, while still being owned by AT&T, is actually handled by Intrado. The new home is all AT&T all the time. And the good news about it is that the PSP was built with the idea of managing GIS data and MSAGs in mind. So it really had that sort of GIS component as a part of the philosophy from the beginning. We are working through the conversion of Dickinson County right now. That conversion has gone very well from a GIS data translation perspective. The reason that it is that we are still working through it rather than having finished it, it has to do with the user interface and the reporting mechanisms and making sure that all of that is lined up and that we are receiving the reports we're looking for, and hopefully in an automated fashion, things like that. But taking my GIS data and making MSAGs out of it, we are super pleased with. That has gone extraordinarily well, and every single time they process our data, we see that process is better, at least for our data sets, than what is happening at Intrado. So we're really excited for that aspect of it. Also, as some of you might know, there were some concerns with the old interface, 911 Net, about the number of people that could be given access to view and maintain MSAG and telephone records for each 911 center. Originally, they had said no more than 2, and we got them to up that a little bit here and there, but it was every single time it was a special request. And AT&T has agreed, not just agreed, they've built within their system the idea that you're going to have a PSAP level of authority to view records and a GIS level of authority to view records. So the stewards and maintainers all the way across Kansas are going to be able to get access. They have promised us differentiated training, meaning that they would have training specialized for people like us who maintain with GIS data. I'd love to be able to say that that is an absolute guarantee. They have said they will do it, but in the past they've had some difficulty with that. So if they don't do differentiated training, we will give you differentiated training. It'll just be more of Eileen and Will and myself, like you're kind of used to. But all data stewards and maintainers will get access to the site. And hopefully you won't have to use it very often. Right now, there's not a whole lot of frequent reason to access the sites, and I don't see that changing much going forward. But you would have it if you were trying to run down an issue, or you were trying to ask a question about the data, or take a look at telephone records for the purposes of trying to understand if an address you were changing or an address you were correcting maybe had a telephone number on that old inaccurate address. So we're pretty excited that they were so open to giving all of the maintainers and stewards access. And when that time comes, we're going to give that to them in a spreadsheet, and you'll all be getting invitations. So next slide, please. Final piece is about training. The data maintainer class is going to be held pre-conference live at CAM from 9 to 12 on Tuesday, October 18th. Registration is, as always, free, but it is required. You do not have to register for the conference to attend, but you do register for the pre-conference workshop through CAM. And then, as I reported last time, the data steward and data maintainer classes are going to be on the new training platform. They will be just giving you the ability to go through and see the slides, answer a few questions, and when we get a solid recorded lecture session for any of the sections of the training. Those will be included on there as well. We'll be giving you more information about that as things go. A whole lot of you, several of you anyway, have heard me complain about it already. But for those of you that have not, Dickinson County is undergoing a serious renovation right now, and we were supposed to be finished and moved into our new digs quite some time ago, and that is dragging out quite a bit. So it has kind of pushed back all of my big projects, like moving the data steward and data maintainer class to that platform. So I'm still hoping to get it done in 2022, but the reason it's not there already is the renovation taking my time. So as soon as I have some free time to do it, we will get it up there. And that is the end of the material I was going to present. So does anybody have any questions, or is there anything anybody would like me to go over?
Not seeing any questions in the chat, so we'll continue tomorrow that, see if anything comes up. So that kind of wraps it up. I think one thing I should have added in kind of a just FYI is some of our surrounding states, especially Nebraska and Oklahoma, are getting further along in their NG911 data development and validation. So if any of you are in the counties that are on the border state, at least north and south, we've reached out to Oklahoma, and I will be reaching out to Nebraska to try to obtain their data. And what will happen with that is we will integrate that into the call handling mapping software, so that right now, of course, we have the statewide data because you guys are awesome for Kansas, but we're just using US Census data for any of the surrounding state border counties. So once the surrounding states start having NG911 validated data, we'll start replacing the US Census data with the data from those states for your surrounding counties. So we're excited about that. I think Colorado and Missouri is a little slower in the progress there, but we're also, communicate with them as needed to see how we can support them or share data or standards or whatever. So just so you know, we're working on that to try to get some better data along the state border as well. So as usual, any updates will be available on the Kansas 911 Coordinating Council website, as well as the DAS site under Initiatives NG911. For probably a whole nother discussion, we've also been working on converting the DAS website into our GIS hub. We're hoping to go live with that sometime in May. So you will continue to see all the NG911 items under an initiatives portion on the new hub site, but in a couple months, our website will look a little bit different for the initial interface. So, okay, well, with that, any questions today before we wrap up? Looks like I have one question. Are you interested in one full county on the border states? So yeah, if someone has a source where it's NG911 validated data, we're trying to get the full county. So you can have, so you have a full view, not just a buffer. I prefer to just do a whole county along the state boundary. So so yes, in a full county. And does that answer your question in the chat there? Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm reaching out, like I said, I'm in discussion with Oklahoma. We'll start working with Nebraska, and then of course the other states as available. So yeah, we're trying to do a whole county, so you're not just seeing a few streets that go off into nowhere in the next county or the next day. At least you see the full county worth for that. I think the trickiest part for the telecommunicators is going to be that, which they see now, our imagery only goes to the state border. So of course we can't extend that out, but at least we can extend out good roads and address points and everything else from the surrounding states. So, okay, well, I don't see any other questions. So thank you everyone for joining us. We will post this recording and the slides on these websites here in the next day or two once it wraps up and we get it processed. So if everyone has a good St. Patrick's Day today and enjoys a green beer, if you think that's a good idea, maybe a green tea, whatever whatever's your preference. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.